أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من
All praise to God, peace be upon his beloved Prophet Mohammed. Assalamu alaikum, and peace be upon you all.
شوقي بالعربية. I will speak in French. مع الأسف الشديد للحضور باللغة العربية ولكن
I am extremely sorry, but I will have to take the floor in French to have a little variation, and hopefully the translation interpretation is available to all of you. So all you have to do to pick up the right channel so that you listen to the interpretation.
Right, I shall express myself in French if you'll allow me. I'd like to thank first and foremost on behalf of the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. I would like to thank all the organizers. We already said that we are very sorry to be late starting our conference, but the organization has been very difficult indeed. The preparation was carried out by the European Muslim Network in Brussels and all those people who worked very hard in order to prepare this conference. Some of them actually cannot be with us today because they couldn't obtain a visa. One of them has to stay in Qatar, but this is, this is so difficult, and it's always the same. I mean, there are the people that you see on the panel, and then there are all those who work very hard behind the scene in order to prepare this day properly. Now, this is my presentation will introduce this two-day conference, and I would like to start by actually saying something quite surprising. My predecessor was talking about the central concept of the Islamic viewpoint, and this is a central notion. Unfortunately, when we are present on the international scene as a Muslim scholar or Muslim researcher, we start from the viewpoint that our values are the same. The formula may be right, but it's not enough. We may share values with other civilizations, but all too often the Muslim conscience, today's Muslims, are actually only underlining the value without talking about the value of the world, and actually missing, therefore, a world vision. Our ethics should be integrated in a vision of life, death, creation, our relation to God and to humans. And, of course, this is exactly what our brother said early on. So, indeed, what I would like to say is this. We are in Europe, but obviously Hans Kung called or did actually mention something which is called global ethics. And that's interesting. What he says is that we should agree on the smallest common denominator for all our common values. We reduce our values and we look at what we have in common universally. So we're not talking about various visions of the world. We're talking about what we have in common. So we are accepting the fact that the ethics is being marginalized on behalf of a narrative that is far too superficial. Because we're not talking about our genuine concepts. We are talking about references, but we are not talking about the central nature of what we think. So what I would like to do here is to actually go about it the other way around. I would like to invite you to actually look into our sources our concepts and our history. One of the biggest deficits of the contemporary Muslim thought and philosophy is to think that you can only going back to the sources by not considering history and to have, considering that it should be necessary to our studies. So from that viewpoint, we should understand how we actually are universal, how we actually in a situation where the Prophet is merciful on the world and where the Muslims are, they should be present and not an added value. And they should not be the unknown entity. So on the basis of our reflection on ethics, how are we going to reconcile our thought with what is at the very heart of the Muslim philosophy, and how are we going to contribute to a genuine debate on ethics and values? From that viewpoint, I would like to make my introductory speech. So I want us to have a genuine dialogue on concepts. Muslims, if they accept a dialogue on references only, will empty their traditions of its sense and its meaning and its consistency. The other thing I would like to say is that there is a prerequisite here, intellectually speaking. Please do understand me, because this is highly demanding, because this is going to mix a profound criticism and a profound spiritualism or spirituality. We have to look at our weaknesses. We have to see which fields, what are the fields where we do not bring an answer. We have to be critical of ourselves. In order to be that, we have to be deeply spiritual, because this type of criticism is only constructive if we do it with all our heart. Human weaknesses should never undermine our faith in God. And that is so important, because some people are so harsh and so hard in their criticism that they lose their faith in God, and others are so faithful that they lose their sense of criticism, tawakkul. That is understanding what inshallah means. It's not justifying what's missing, it's hoping by doing. And I put all my trust in God. It's not about being idle and doing nothing. Some people thought that inshallah is about, well, we'll see what happens. Inshallah is about hoping, about acting in our Muslim civilization. Inshallah means two things. We'll do whatever we can, and when we can't, God will do it for us. But it's a positive type of criticism, and that's what we have to do. We have to look at our traditions with a critical mind, but also with hope and with faith. And we have, of course, we have to believe in our past, and we have to admire the researchers of our past history, but let's not forget about the importance of the present time. So I would like to have a reflection on our traditions. Let's see what happened in the past. At a time in history, how is it that this formidable civilization that on the basis of ilm and fiqh, and el-fan, that is to say art, any type of art. How come that this civilization that opened itself to all sorts of human works has managed not to be part of scientific contributions, cultural contributions, artistic contributions, financial contributions? But do not misunderstand me. Contributing to something is about proposing something new. The Muslim thought historically has always been based on proposals. It's not only about responding to something, it's about being proactive. It's about having a concept about life. And this should be based on a good understanding of human beings and a good understanding of our relationship to God. So if you go back to the dimension of akhlaq, and this will be the topic for our 4 panels today, there is something which is particularly important. What will actually make the difference is I've been sent in order to actually represent good behavior, and what it says, yes, you are noble. It means that your specific nature is being able to translate principles into actions. And this is absolutely essential. So as Muslims, the questions that we have to ask is, if we do want to contribute, if we want to be proactive, let's go back to our traditions, let's go back to our sources, and let's look at how this tradition was actually built. Why should ethics be at the center of our thoughts? What I would like to underline here is that when you look at this, this is a real question. The real question is to say who and how, who can determine what is good, Hassan, or al-Kabir, evil, or in moral terms, al-Maruf. Who will determine this? And how will it be determined? In the Muslim tradition, how does it happen? Now, it's very important today, in order to be reconciled with our own tradition, in order to be reconciled with our own knowledge, because you see what is happening today in our Muslim tradition is that there is a kind of a hierarchy of knowledge. Listen to what is coming from the East and the West in the most advanced civilizations. What is the biggest scientific challenge? Where is it that ethics are being lost somewhere? Look and listen to what our researchers say in terms of ethics, human or experimental sciences. Problem is that anything is so specialized this day that everything is getting fragmented and our knowledge is becoming fragmented. We are being experts in all sorts of fields, but in fact, we may know a lot, but we don't know why we should know something. You can become a physician and you can have the best possible knowledge if you do not reflect on why you have become a physician, why you have become a doctor. It will have no meaning. And today, the global economy prevails. All sciences are interconnected. The main issue in the Western world today is that knowledge is so fragmented that nobody knows anymore what the ultimate objective is. Islam is about a holistic approach. Yes, of course, we have to be specialized in our knowledge, but never disconnected from other knowledge. Being multifaceted, knowing that sciences are interrelated is essential in ethics. Without this interconnection of sciences, ethics will be lost, and ethics will become a reflection that's being added to science in order to avoid the worst, but it doesn't give you any direction. It's about avoiding the worst, but it will not give you any ultimate objective. And as Muslims, that's exactly what we do nowadays. We try to avoid the worst. So if we go back to our history, we realize that in terms of ethics, there are three sources. Well, there are many of them, but I'd like to list three of them. I don't have time. I mean, I only have 40 minutes. But the three main sources of our ethical thoughts, well, the first one came very naturally. It's the legal dimension. It's the fiqh. Now, if you look at what happens, is anything that's related to the rule used to be related to ethics. Praying is supposed to keep us away from any bad behavior. We have rules that have an ethics that has a meaning. So, for some researchers, religion is about ethics. It's about good and evil. It's not only about saying what the limits are, but saying what the limits are in the name of good and against the evil.
إن مكناهم في الأرض الذين إن مكناهم في الأرض أقاموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة أمروا بالمعروف ونهوا عن المنكر. Ça veut dire quoi? Le principe de verticalité avec Dieu, le principe de
principle of verticality with God, the principle of solidarity between God and the poor, promoting the good and avoiding the evil.
Doit être pensé à la lumière de l'éthique. Si vous prenez les premiers travaux, et parmi ceux-ci, c'est très très intéressant. Même dans la définition de la sunna, quand vous revenez
at the definition of sunnah,
Malik, vous apercevez
you will quickly perceive
réflexion légale,
that in the legal reflection, there is also a moral reflection. And this is widely recognized.
Il pense le droit naturellement dans l'éthique acceptée de sa communauté au moment où il s'exprime. Très important.
And this is extremely important because historically it's not always been the case. Historically, this link has not always been present.
Par exemple, vous le connaissez, dans la catégorisation du légal, notre catégorisation
the way we categorize our actions,
les 5 que nous connaissons, c'est-à-dire
the 5 that we know,
le permis,
what is authorized, what is forbidden, what is reprehensible, what is encouraged, and what is authorized in general. All those elements, in fact, are categories that will be used in the legal field, but basically they are also ethical. They determine the ethical nature of your behavior. What you say is that it is morally better. It's preferable. So researchers do work on ethics. And this is a reflection that's particularly important, to the point where we have researchers that will work on that. If you have a researcher who looks for the raison d'être of a rule, and sometimes they confuse between the raison d'être, the ratio legis of a rule and the rule.
99% de la raison d'être d'une règle
95% of the ratio legis of a rule has an ethical objective. It's not always the case, but there is always an ethical reflection on the rule for which we try to define the ratio legis. The percentage can be different, but it's important. So we have to realize that when we talk about ethics, when ethics is part of the law, we have to reconcile the rule and the meaning. The problem is when the rule prevails on the meaning of the rule, on the ethics of the rule, to the point where you actually get obsessed with the rule and you forget about the ethics that gives a meaning to the rule. And you've got so many examples of this.
Comme par exemple aujourd'hui, chaque fois que l'on parle
Today, every time we
on parle de quoi?
talk
C'est-à-dire la pensée de la structuration de l'État.
about the state and the way the state is being structured, I mean, you will quickly realize that we overlook some very important elements. If you focus too much on the political elements in your political reflection, you will lose something along the way. There is
Il écrit un livre sur cette dimension
a
éthique
book
de la vie
on
d'ici-bas
this
et de la religion.
ethical dimension of
Et donc, de ce
religion
point de vue-là,
and
vous avez un
life
penseur
on
qui a
this
été
earth.
extrêmement rigoureux sur
And the
une
person who
pensée de la
wrote that
structure
book
politique,
was
mais
extremely
très
well
engagé sur la réflexion,
structured,
sur la notion de la magnanimité, sur la
but
façon de
he
la facilité, sur la
was
façon
also
de l'éthique du
talking
comportement.
about
Donc, les
the
savants, il ne
ethical
faut pas les
aspect
réduire à
of
certaines
our
interprétations et
behavior.
récupérations politiques
So,
a posteriori.
in
Il
fact,
faut
what I'm
avoir
trying to
une
say is
vision
that
beaucoup plus importante de ce qu'ils ont
our
pu,
thinkers and
de ce qu'ils ont pu
our
développer. Même
researchers
des savants
are
comme
more
Ibn
than
Hazm,
researchers.
qui est min al-Zahiriyya, ce sont des gens qui étaient littéralistes. Mais là aussi, on le sait
Some
aujourd'hui,
people
on sait qu'il
have
avait
been
un
extremely,
goût
well, they've
littéraire et un
been
goût
literalists.
esthétique particulièrement important. Il a écrit un livre, Kitab
And
al-Akhlaq wa
there
Siyar,
was a book that was
particulièrement
written
important
that's
sur toutes ces
particularly
réflexions-là. Même
important
Ibn
on this
Hazm,
type
dont on réduit parfois
of
cette idée au fait
reflection.
qu'il n'était qu'un littéraliste. Non, il a lié à toute sa réflexion
But
légale
some
une réflexion
thinkers
qui est liée sur le
do make a
comportement,
link
sur le
between
comportement.
the
Et
legal
même Ibn
field
Taymiyyah,
and
dont on dit aujourd'hui
the
des
behavior.
choses qui sont absolument fausses, qui
And
sont des
for
négations
some
ou des amputations ou même des
authors, some
distorsions de
authors
son apport,
are
toute la
totally
dimension
misunderstood.
de quelqu'un qui a pensé la règle de façon claire,
Because
mais qui a pensé
you've
la
got some
relation
authors
entre
who
le
really
naql
thought
wal-aql,
about the
c'est-à-dire le
relationship
texte et
that exists
l'intelligence, qui a pensé la
between
dimension
scripture
mystique, la
and
dimension
reason.
intérieure,
People
ce sont
who
des
have
gens dont on néglige.
thought
Et pourquoi est-ce que je dis
about
ça?
it,
Parce que
and they
ce
are
sont
being
des
overlooked.
savants
And
qui
I'm
étaient
saying this because
à
those
l'avant de
researchers
toute la réflexion
were at the
légale,
forefront
mais
of a
qui n'ont
legal
pas coupé le
reflection,
légal de la pensée
but they
éthique, de la pensée du
integrated
sens. Et ceci
both
est
dimensions, the
particulièrement
ethical
important.
dimension and the
La
legal
référence
dimension.
historique
The
pour nous
historical
de Mohamed
reference
el-Ghazali
for us,
était
Israeli,
aussi de ce point de vue-là
was of the
particulièrement
same
important
viewpoint
dans son apport. On cite souvent
in his
Yahya
contribution.
Ulumuddin, c'est un texte
Ilya
de
Ulumuddin,
référence,
for example,
mais
is
dans
a
son texte sur
text of
Nidhal
reference.
al-A'mal, il fait
And
cet
in another
élément-là,
text,
il fait
he
ce
is
travail-là
actually
de relations extrêmement déterminées sur la question
establishing
d'éthique. Donc,
a
des personnes
connection
qui étaient
between
des
the legal
références
field
morales
and the
ou des
moral
références
field.
légales, des références dans le
So
texte,
you
ont pu
do
identifier
have
les deux.
people
Et nous, ça c'est une de nos
who
sources.
can
En
make
d'autres
that
termes,
link.
il faut absolument
And for us,
que
that
d'un
is
point de vue
essential.
musulman, nous ne finissions pas par dire
We
l'éthique est strictement
don't want
rationnelle et
to
non
be
légale.
in a
Faire le
situation
contraire.
where
Il
we
faut
say
réconcilier
ethics
l'éthique avec le légal plutôt que de le
has
sortir
got
du
nothing
légal.
to do with the
Et
legal
ça a été la
field.
crainte de beaucoup de savants
The
quand ils ont
two
vu par
are
l'influence
bound
exogène
together.
qu'on pouvait suivre la pensée des Grecs, qu'on pouvait
But
suivre
of course,
la
some
pensée
researchers
de
have been
d'autres religions
impacted by
et qu'on commençait à
exogenous
distinguer les choses.
influences
Notre
and
problème
have
aujourd'hui,
tried
c'est
to
qu'en voulant
disconnect the
résister
legal field
aux
and the
influences
ethical
étrangères
field.
qui
But
distinguaient
by
le légal de
resisting
l'éthique, on a finalement
those
pensé que l'éthique nous
influences,
protégerait et on a fait la même chose. On a
we
distingué
thought that
l'éthique du
ethics
légal.
would protect us, and in the
Un
end, we
moment
did the
historique de
same.
crise, et il faut
We
de ce point de
disconnected
vue-là que nous puissions
ethics
revenir à
and
toutes ces dimensions.
the legal field,
rapidement,
and we have
un
to go
deuxième
back
domaine sur
to
lequel
actually
aujourd'hui,
putting
moi
the two
j'insiste
together
beaucoup, vous
again.
savez, quand
And there
on
is
est
something
dans les
else
sociétés
I would
majoritairement
like
musulmanes,
to insist
quand on
upon.
est ici, même à l'intérieur de CILE, avec
If you are
certains de nos
here,
collègues,
even
il y
inside
a un
the
mot quand on vous le
research
dit,
center, there is this word.
c'est une plaisanterie, mais elle veut dire quelque chose.
When
Quand on
they
dit
say that, it's a joke, but when they say
falsif, philosophe, c'est un philosophe. Ici,
philosophe,
c'est loin
for
de la
example,
réflexion légale sérieuse.
it means,
Et
well,
même
you're very
d'ailleurs,
far
Ilm
from
al-Kalam,
being serious in legal
La
terms.
parole qui est cette science de la parole, vous savez, quand on est dans...
But you know,
Pour les Égyptiens, on connaît ceci, mais je pense que c'est partout. C'est
the
international.
Egyptians
Quand on dit
will
kalam, ça veut
be
dire,
familiar with
pose
this.
toujours.
But when you say to somebody, yeah, okay,
Et pourtant,
you
il faut que
talk,
nous
but that's all you
réconcilions
do.
avec un domaine très très important
As it
qui a
may
été
be, we have
fondamental.
to
Et ça,
realize
c'est fondamental pourquoi
that
Vous avez
there
un
is
savant
something
du 19e
fundamental.
siècle,
There was a
égyptien,
researcher, an Egyptian,
Mohamed
Mohamed
Raz,
Raz,
qui a écrit un
in
livre
the
sur-
19th century,
d'ailleurs, il l'a
wrote
écrit
a
en
book
français,
in French,
à la
mind
Sorbonne.
you,
qui a été traduit en arabe,
that was
que
translated
des gens
into
ont
Arabic.
trouvé en arabe après la traduction du français. Et d'ailleurs, il a été
Actually,
traduit en anglais par
It
l'arabe.
was translated into English
Comment les cheminements de la
through
pensée.
Arabic.
Et il a écrit un livre très très important
And this book
où il
was
essaie
a very
de
interesting
penser
book.
l'éthique, la morale du
And
Coran.
he is actually
Il essaie de penser
reflecting
le
upon
constituant de l'éthique.
ethics
Il s'adresse
and
directement
upon the
à
Quran.
Sheikh del Lazhar qui vient à la Sorbonne et qui s'adresse à Kant et qui s'adresse à Bergson et qui constitue et qui dit
actually,
une chose très importante.
he says something very important.
Dans l'héritage
In the Muslim
quelque chose
heritage,
qui a été
there
un
is
appareil
nothing
moral, éthique qui soit construit. On n'a pas travaillé. Et il
that
cite ceci par rapport à
is
l'histoire de la pensée
ethical
musulmane en disant qu'il
structure.
y a eu un manque dans notre
And so what he
constitution
says
de
is,
la référence
in our
éthique. Et là, il a
own
parfaitement
structure,
raison.
this is a weakness.
Vous avez un autre
And he is
penseur,
perfectly
il est,
right. There is another
japonais,
thinker,
qui fait un travail
Izutsu,
sur l'éthique
he's a
du
Japanese,
Coran,
and he is
et qui
working
est
on the ethical
vraiment,
nature of
des moments donnés,
the
vous
Quran,
apercevez que des savants
and
qui ne
you
sont pas
quickly
musulmans
realize that
ont
researchers who
pénétré
are not
l'héritage
Muslims
musulman
did really
beaucoup plus
penetrate the
profondément que
Muslim
beaucoup de
heritage in a more
Et
profound
lui, il va
way
développer cette idée
than
du
many
grand,
Muslims.
de
And
la
he
grande
is
dichotomie.
talking
Il y
about
a
this
le début de la morale
dichotomy,
islamique, elle est fondée sur
the
l'iman ou le
beginnings
kufr.
of the Muslim
En fait, Dras
ethics.
n'est pas d'accord avec lui. Lui
Dras
commence
doesn't
par la
agree
prohibition, mais
with him.
pourquoi est-ce que je parle de ceci?
But why am I
Parce
saying
qu'en fait,
this?
l'une des
Because
sources
indeed,
de
one of the
l'éthique
sources
musulmane,
of
elle va
Muslim
être liée
ethics
à deux
is
champs de
linked
l'investigation,
to
à
two
ilm
fields
al-kalam
of investigation.
wal-falasifa. Alors, quelle est la différence entre les
And
deux?
what
C'est
is the
que
difference
ilm
between the
falasifa,
two?
ce sont
In
ceux
falasifa
qu'on considère avoir été
is
influencés par
what we
l'héritage
consider
grec.
to be influenced by the Greek
Et
heritage.
d'ailleurs, le
And
mot vient
indeed,
de la
the
tradition
word
grecque. Et puis,
comes
ilm
from the
al-kalam,
Greek
c'est un discours
tradition.
interne
And the other one
et qui
is an
va se poser la
internal
question, cette
narrative
fois-ci, non pas
with
de
a
la
central
relation
question,
entre
not that
la
of the
règle et la
relation
morale, mais
between
des
the
sources de
rule
la morale.
and ethics, but the question
C'est-à-dire,
about the
qui
sources
dit le
of
bien et qui
ethics.
dit le mal?
Who
Vous
says
connaissez
what
les
is good
Mu'tazila
and what
pensent
is
que
evil?
c'est la rationalité humaine, nous pouvons avoir accès. Alors, je ne vais pas rentrer dans une longue discussion
Now, I'm not
philosophique,
going
mais
to enter
simplement,
into a philosophical
des penseurs
debate,
musulmans
but Muslim
ont développé
thinkers
un rapport
did
sur la
develop
question de la raison,
something
que quand vous
on
utilisez et discutez
reason.
aujourd'hui parmi les musulmans,
And if you
nous
do
sommes dans
talk
le
to Muslims
superficiel. C'est comme
today,
si ça n'existait
you will
pas.
realize that
Comme si nous
it
avions
is
compris,
as
après
if it
Abu Hamid
never
al-Ghazali,
existed.
qui rejette la philosophie, qu'il ne fallait plus entrer dans la discussion
It's
sur la
like
rationalité
you
et sur
don't
la question de la
have
révélation.
to
Et ça,
talk
c'est
about
une
the
erreur.
revelation.
Il faut
And that's a
réconcilier
mistake. You
la
have to
pensée
reconcile the
musulmane avec
Muslim
la philosophie du savoir,
with
avec une épistémologie. Pourquoi? Parce que
the philosophy of knowledge.
elle donne un
Epistemology
sens
is
au savoir.
about giving a
Elle donne
meaning to
une
knowledge.
philosophie
It's
du savoir. Comment
about
est-ce qu'on
a
constitue le
philosophy
savoir?
of our
Et que nous
knowledge.
sommes coupés
How
de
is
ceci
knowledge
par
being
crainte des apports étrangers.
constructed?
Alors oui, c'est
And we cut
particulièrement
ourselves
important.
from
Un de ceux
that.
qui a été le plus ferme sur cette
And
question-là, c'est
exogenous
Netanya, qui refusait
influences.
la logique
Netanya
grecque.
did
Mais refuser la
refuse
logique grecque ne
the
l'a pas
Greek
empêché
logics,
d'écrire 9 volumes
didn't
sur
prevent
une
him
naql wal
from
aql. Il
writing
refuse la
9
théorie
books.
grecque de la logique, mais
So
il développe
he
de l'intérieur une
refuses
vraie réflexion
this logics,
islamique
but
endogène
then
sur ces questions-là.
he
Et
goes
quand
on
Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rejette
carrying
rapport
out
de Falasifa, c'est-à-dire il rejette la philosophie, c'est que ce qu'il
an
rejette,
endogenous
c'est la
logics.
logique acceptée par Ibn Sina Avicenne et qui est une logique exogène au principe de l'islam. Et d'ailleurs, même ça se discute. Même ça se
But,
discute.
I mean,
Ce que fera
all
Averroès, c'est qu'il le
this
discutera. Mais
is debatable,
le rejet du débat
obviously,
philosophique,
but
le
rejecting
rejet de
the
la
philosophical
réflexion philosophique ne
debate
fait pas partie de la
is
tradition
not
musulmane.
part
Elle
of the
fait
Muslim
partie de la
tradition.
tradition musulmane quand la tradition
It's
musulmane a
part of the
peur
Muslim tradition
de
when the
la
Muslim
pensée
tradition
exogène,
is
a peur
afraid
d'être
of
colonisée. Et donc, il faut
exogenous
que nous réconcilions à
influences
ce
and is
savoir-là
afraid of being
fondamental.
colonized.
Pourquoi?
And we have to
Parce que
remember
vous allez
this.
voir
And this
que
is
dans la
fundamental because
discussion
you will
qu'il y a
see
entre
that
les
in
Mu'tazila, et puis ensuite il va y avoir
the
Ash'ariyya,
debate,
et puis il va y avoir la position d'Entre-deux del Maturidiyya, vous avez de ce point de vue-là des réflexions
you
extrêmement
will
importantes.
have a whole
Si vous n'êtes pas
series of
équipé avec
fundamental
ça
reflections.
aujourd'hui au
And if you
XXe
are not
siècle, vous allez
rightly
répondre aux
equipped
questions
in the
contemporaines
20th
comment
century,
en faisant de
how will you
l'éthique
actually
et non pas des questions
face the
fondamentales
contemporary
sur la conception de l'homme,
challenges?
sur la conception
You
du
won't
savoir,
be
sur la
able
conception
to
de la philosophie
think
du
properly
savoir, de l'épistémologie
about the
fondamentale. Alors on
fundamental
est en train de bricoler
epistemology.
des réponses islamiques
So,
sur le détail et non pas des concessions
we
islamiques sur le fondamental.
actually are not
Donc, de ce
focusing
point de
enough
vue-là,
on what is
vous avez
fundamental.
une
And we dwell too
formidable,
much on details.
Histoire de la pensée musulmane extrêmement importante.
The history of
vous dire une
the
chose?
Muslim philosophy is so
Abu
important.
Hamid al-Ghazali,
Al-Ghazali,
Hujjat al-Islam, c'est-à-dire cette référence-là,
this
il savait
reference,
sur la
well,
pensée
he
grecque
knew things about the Christian philosophy, the Greek philosophy. He knew about the others, but he also knew about himself. Much more than our current Muslim researchers. They knew far more than what we do now. In fact, intellectually, you need to be rightly equipped in order to reject the Western philosophy the way he does it. Today, we are in the 21st century. This text I'm talking about is so powerful. I mean, he was a Cartesian response before Descartes himself. So should we actually not work on philosophy? Yes, we should work on our philosophy, but from the inside. This is essential. There are things that are so important, even in terms of references. Maybe you never heard this, but in the 11th century, Abdelazeem died in the 12th century, and there is another author, Miskawi, who died before him. And in fact, the whole Muslim philosophy is actually integrating Greek notions. And Miskawi is doing something particularly interesting. He's a bridge with the third source because he's developing a reflection on the ultimate objective of the Greek philosophy. Man is looking for happiness. And he actually uses Aristoteles. He uses the Neoplatonician philosophy, and he establishes a bridge between philosophy and Muslim mystics. So from that viewpoint, he's very different from the other author because he talks about reconciliation. Look at the intellectual capacities of our researchers. I mean, they actually can integrate the other people's philosophy. But it's not about being integrated. It's how I will integrate other things into my own view of the world. We're not talking about DIY here. When some listen to me, I mean, some people say to me, well, this is highly dangerous. But, I mean, often non-Muslims understand far better what I'm talking about than Muslims do. Some Muslims say to me, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to dilute our religion? No, of course I'm not. I just plead for consistency. I don't want, I want to focus on what is fundamental and reconcile ethics and the legal field. You will realize that often in Asia, in the Arab world, and also in the Western world, often what happens is that we've got this new theory on our internal tensions and Sufism. This new mysticism is saying that it will say nothing about being unfair in order to be accepted by the state. But that's not the way to do it. You cannot talk about Muslim ethics if you do not integrate there everything. Hassan al-Basri, for example, 8th century, who actually talked about the relationship that we have between the world
parce qu'on
and
est avec Dieu, va
sadness.
toujours être déterminé par le comportement. Toujours.
It's
En
always
fait,
determined by
l'éthique
our
chez les soufis,
behavior.
qui sont enracinés dans la
Ethics
tradition
in
musulmane, est une
Sufism,
éthique
in
du
the Muslim
comportement.
tradition, is
Il
about
n'y a
behavior.
de possibilité d'être éthique que dans le
You can
vivre
only be
éthique.
ethical
Ça,
if
c'est
you
une dimension
live.
très importante. Et vous avez
ethically.
Al-Adawiya que vous connaissez, elle va plutôt insister.
There are other
sur le thème
researchers
du
who
Allah,
insist on other elements. How much time do I have?
Subhanallah. J'étais à la fin de mon introduction.
Oh dear, I've got
Non, s'il te plaît,
5
c'était
minutes
de
left
l'humour,
and
l'humour
it was
halal.
only
Donc,
my introduction. No, I'm joking. This is my personal sense of
J'ai
humor.
terminé. Qu'est-ce que je disais? Oui, toute cette
Pardon me.
dimension. Cette
Yes,
dimension
so
de la,
this
de la
dimension
mystique aussi, et là
of
aussi, il faut que nous fassions
mystics
extrêmement
is something that
attention.
we have to be
Dès le
very
8e
careful
siècle,
about,
comme je l'ai dit,
because
8e siècle, 9e
in the
siècle,
8th century,
10e
9th
siècle, vous avez
century,
des savants
10th
qui vont
century,
développer.
researchers
Et le
started
Muhafizi, par
to
exemple, c'est quelqu'un qui est
develop
extrêmement pointilleux sur les règles. Il est pour une mystique.
this
et le
obsession
Junayd,
with
c'est la même
details.
chose. C'est autre chose que ce que l'on va voir dans d'autres traditions par la suite. Et là, il faut être
But that's very
très, très, très
different
prudent. Vous connaissez ce qu'on dit de Ibn Arabi.
from what
Ibn
happens
Arabi
in
va aller
other
extrêmement
traditions.
loin. Et Rumi vont
Some
aller
went
loin,
very
mais
far
attention.
in
Je
this.
vous propose de faire
What
très,
I
très
would
attention à
propose
ces
is that
jugements
be very
qui,
attentive
vont trop vite
about
parmi ces savants parce
being
qu'ils
too
ont un
hasty
discours
in
très
our way to
spécialisé
judge
par rapport
those
à ce qu'ils sont en train
researchers.
de dire et qui n'est
They
pas
are
forcément
so
accessible à tout le monde.
specialized
Faire attention
that it
à
is
ce
not
que
necessarily
la
understandable
terminologie
by
mystique, elle
everybody.
soit étudiée avant d'être
This
utilisée.
mystical
Qu'est-ce que je veux dire par là?
terminology should
C'est
be
que vous avez une
understood
longue
before it is being
tradition
used.
de gens
But you've
qui
got
sont
such
à
a lengthy
l'intérieur et qui
tradition
mettent en
of
évidence,
people who, from the
quel
inside,
élément très très important.
underline a
En
few
fait,
fundamental
l'essentiel
things.
de la
The
vie,
essential of our
regardez,
life. Look,
les savants du fiqh vont se poser
the
la
fiqh
question du moyen.
researchers are talking
Les
about
philosophes et le
the ways and the
mutakallimun, ils vont
means.
se poser la question de la
The
source.
others are talking about the
Et les
source.
soufis vont se poser la question
And
de
the
la
Sufis are
finalité. Quelle est
talking
la
about the
finalité? Qu'est-ce que je
ultimate
cherche?
objective.
Je
What am I
cherche à
looking
me
for?
réformer et à changer
I'm
mon
trying to
comportement
change my
pour
behavior
être dans l'amour de
in
Dieu.
order to
Et le
be
propre,
in the love
in
of
kuntum
God.
tuhibbuna Allah fattabi'uni. Et comment est-ce qu'on va suivre le prophète
And
sallam
how
à partir
shall I
des
follow
suluk,
the
c'est-à-dire
prophet?
à partir du comportement.
By
Les uns
having the
pensent la
right
source,
behavior.
l'autre pense le
Something
moyen,
in
le
terms
troisième pense
of
la finalité, mais
sources,
l'éthique est partout.
others things in terms of
L'éthique, elle est dans
objectives,
trois domaines.
but ethics is
Mais
everywhere.
la finalité, c'est de dire chez les
The
soufis,
final
quelle est la
objective for
finalité de la
Sufis is
vie?
to say,
Qu'est-ce que
okay,
l'on cherche?
what's the
En fait, on
ultimate
cherche à se
objective of
réformer,
life?
on cherche à
We
réformer
try to
son
reform
comportement,
ourselves,
on
to
cherche à
reform our
s'approcher d'Allah
behavior,
Ta'ala,
to,
et on va avoir des maqamat et ahwal. Et puis les maqamat, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Et l'ahwal, c'est des mawahib, comme il est dit, elle est connue. Et le maqamat, l'ahwal mawahib, ou le maqamat mutasibat, c'est-à-dire les maqamat, les ahwal, c'est des choses qui sont données par Dieu, et puis les maqamat, c'est des choses dont on
and
fait
the
l'effort. Mais
others
c'est un
are
travail
the things you actually
d'effort que l'on fait
have to
pour
make an
arriver à la
effort.
finalité.
The effort
Une fois
that you
qu'on a
have
dit
to
ça,
make
j'en
in
arrive
order to reach your
à
final
ma
objective.
deuxième partie qui me permet de conclure en même temps.
I would like to
Quand on voit
conclude
ces sources-là et
by
qu'on
saying that if
comprend
you
la
look at
centralité
those
de l'éthique,
sources
on comprend une
and
chose.
once you
Quand on
understand
parle
that
de l'éthique,
ethics
on va
is
se poser la
absolutely
question des
essential,
sources,
then
on
you
va
understand
poser
why
la
you
question
have
des
to
moyens,
look
et on va
at the
se poser la question
sources,
des
at the
finalités.
means,
Les trois
and at the final
ordres dont je
objectives.
viens de parler,
Those are the
l'expression
three
des- Et nous,
elements
en tant que
that are the
musulmans
most
et en tant
important
que
ones.
musulmans,
And as
pour ceux
Muslims,
aussi qui viennent à nous et qui ne sont
and
pas
for those who
musulmans,
are
ils
not
doivent aussi
Muslims,
comprendre que nos sources sont
well,
importantes
they should
et que
understand
notre
that
histoire,
our
elle est
sources
importante.
are important
Alors,
and
qu'est-ce
our
qui s'est
history
passé?
is
Pourquoi, à un
important.
moment
So what
donné,
happened?
cette
Why is it
formidable
that at some point in
puissance
time,
du savoir
this
qui
power of
regardait l'éthique
knowledge
comme centrale
that would
et le
look at
savoir comme
ethics
un
as
moyen
being
nécessaire,
central and
eh
the
bien,
knowledge
qu'est-ce
as
qui s'est
being
passé?
an
Bien,
essential
il y a
means?
des
What
choses sur lesquelles
happened?
il faut que
Well,
nous nous arrêtions, et c'est pour ça que
we
je disais,
have
il faut
to
être
stop for a
critique,
few
il faut
minutes
être
on
critique
some
constructive.
things. We
Il y
have
a un
to be
élément qui est
positive in
important,
our
c'est ce que je
criticism.
disais tout à
One
l'heure,
important
il va y
element
avoir
is what
une
I was mentioning
fragmentation
earlier
des
on.
sciences islamiques.
The
Et une prédominance
Islamic
du droit
sciences
sur tous les
started
autres, parce que le
to
droit
be
donne l'impression qu'on
fragmented.
résiste mieux à la
The
tâche
law
de toutes les autres
gives the
civilisations.
impression that we
En fait,
resist better
c'est par
to
le
the
savoir,
attacks of other
c'est par,
civilizations, but
la
through knowledge,
confiance en Dieu et en
through
soi,
our trust
qu'on est
in
une
ourselves and in
civilisation
our God,
qui offre et qui
we
contribue.
are a
Mais quand on
civilization
se sent
that
dominé,
offers and
c'est le droit
contributes.
qui va prendre le dessus.
But
À un
if
moment donné de
you
notre
feel
histoire, qui se
dominated,
situe
the
aux
law
alentours du
prevails.
XIIIe siècle,
And
du
this is what
XIVe,
happened in the
du XVe,
13th,
il va y
the
avoir
14th, the
une
15th century.
fixation sur le droit
There
et
was this
une
focus
déconnexion
on law
entre le
and this
droit et
disconnection
l'éthique,
between
le droit
law
et la
and
philosophie,
ethics,
la
law and
philosophie
philosophy,
et même la
philosophy
mystique, au
and
point qu'on a
mystics,
sorti
to the point
certains
where actually we went out of some of those fields. But we have to go back to our history in order to understand how we reached this point. And this should be at the basis of our reflection. So for those of you who are Muslims whether you work on religion or not, or whether you are not Muslims, whether you are researchers or not, we have to be very clear about who has the power. Why do we have the power? Why do we give the power to some researchers and not to others? Why is it that we talk about the power of the rule and not the power of the meaning? Why the power of exteriority? Because this means that Muslims today, we've reached a point where we judge our brothers and sisters on external appearances and not on their internal philosophy. If we do not have a debate upstream, then you can't be proactive downstream. All that can happen is that things will be forced upon you. If we want to develop a universal, a global ethics, we have to think about the way we understand the world. And that is what we are trying to say in our center. What I said to you takes us back to something which is far more important. And this something that is far more important is that we can't talk about this if we, Muslims, we do not go back to our concept of the world. And our concept of the world is what's the statute of the human beings in the universe. The concept of the world in our religion is resisting a lawless capital and capitalism or sciences without an objective. For us, as Muslims, we have to remind ourselves of a central notion, not the way Daesh does it, of course. Khilafah. It means we are not the owners of this world. We have to manage this world. And we have to know what the final and the ultimate objective is, and what we can contribute to the contemporary sciences today is not only to be in competition with sciences. I mean, some people say to us, a successful Islamic economy is similar to the other economies. If in our economy it's all about profit, it means that we haven't understood what our final objective should be. And the same goes for philosophy. We are not talking about competing for quantities and for quantitative success. We are talking about quality, the quality of our ultimate objective. We have to go back to our notion of the world, our notion of the humankind. That is what ethics is about, and we cannot have an ethical reflection if we do not redevelop the interdependency of our knowledge. In bioethics, for example, you can't, you have to think about medicine, you can't talk about interest or no interest. The idea is to know whether we can actually have a house without a riba. This goes through a reflection on ethics. This goes together with a genuine philosophy of the Muslim law. Why? Because we know this in the Muslim tradition. Some researchers, when they don't have an answer, they use legal tricks in order to make halal what is not totally halal. We have no choice, do we? That kind of thing. No, I'm serious. I'm absolutely serious. So we have no vision upstream. So we have to invite our researchers to reflect upon this. So this idea of this cosmology and this ultimate objective is based on this notion of fitra. How do we actually... What is our concept of human beings in our civilization? How can we contribute to a reflection on nature and on sciences and on the humankind? What is our fundamental contribution? And should we say, in order to be accepted by the others, that we have the same values as all the others?
On a les mêmes valeurs théoriques que vous.
Do you think that is what the world needs?
Pour changer ce monde avec vous. Voilà la vraie question.
Or don't you think that the world needs our proposals? We are going to talk today about economics, gender issues. We are going to talk about methodology and our relationship with scripture. But let's keep in mind what is essential in our philosophy. I should have given you the good example by actually concluding in time. I'm sorry.